On February 9, 2013, the eve of Chinese New Year, 29-year-old Chinese singer Wanting Ku performed on China's highest-rated show, the Spring Festival Gala. Sent to Canada by her mother at the age of 16, she rose to fame with her song, "You Exist in My Song," winning applause, fame, and fortune. Just when people thought her life was perfect, she faced widespread condemnation from many Chinese people. Welcome to Red Eastern True Crime. If you like true crime stories, please subscribe to my channel. Let's dive into this story. Before we dive in, let's start with a few background stories. Around 2010, 566 workers in Harbin, Heilongjiang Province, northeast China, were forcibly dismissed from their longtime jobs at a state-owned enterprise. Their medical insurance, pension, and housing funds had long been suspended, and the promised severance pay was minimal and delayed. The dismissed workers received only about 10% of what they were owed. They banded together to report the situation, but faced threats and indifference, and the issue remained unresolved. One such worker was a father. One evening, his son told him that he needed sneakers for a school sports event the next day, costing about $3 to $10. When the father heard this, he remained silent. His wife began to scold him for being useless. Without arguing, he finished his meal, put down his chopsticks, went to the balcony, and jumped from the 6th floor. Another laid-off worker who was sick could not afford medical treatment after his insurance was cut off. He chose to hang himself rather than burden his family with debt. In Harbin, where winter temperatures dropped to -24 degrees Celsius, about -11 degrees Fahrenheit, the laid-off workers' heat was cut off. They couldn't afford coal and had to rely on burning coal dust to survive. Some sought refuge with relatives. Others endured the bitter cold. These 566 laid-off workers and their families were victims of Wanting Ku's mother, Zhang Mingjie, and her corruption. Born in 1956, in Tiling, Liaoning Province, Zhang Mingjie began working in Harbin in 1972. In 1980, she joined the government and rose steadily from an ordinary clerk to become deputy director of the Urban Development and Reform Commission in 2013. She and her first husband had a daughter, Wanting Ku, in 1983. They divorced a few years later, and Zhang raised Wanting on her own. At the age of 6, Wanting saw a piano at her mother's friend's house and soon had one of her own, with piano lessons arranged by her mother. During the mass layoffs of state-owned enterprise workers in northeastern China in the 1990s, many struggled to survive. But Wanting, whose mother was a government official, enjoyed a comfortable life. She grew up loving music and often participated in school singing competitions, where she discovered her natural talent for singing. In 2000, 16-year-old Wanting wanted to study abroad. Her mother objected at first, but soon relented. Zhang insisted that Wanting study business, just as she had pushed her to learn piano. Wanting attended Seneca College in Canada, with annual tuition and living expenses totaling about $25,000. At the time, the average monthly salary in Harbin was about 1,000 RMB, about $120, and Zhang's income was only a few $100s, but she was able to afford Wanting's education in Canada. During her studies, Wanting lived in a big house, drove luxury cars, and traveled a lot. From 2002 to 2011, Zhang served as deputy district mayor of Daoli district in Harbin, her longest-serving position. In late 2011, she was promoted to deputy director of the Urban Development and Reform Commission and director of the Urbanization Construction Leading Group Office, the 5th highest rank among Chinese officials. In 2014, the Central Inspection Team arrived in Heilongjiang to investigate government corruption. In September, Zhang was detained by the Discipline Inspection Commission. In early 2015, her name appeared in the China Discipline Inspection Daily for her involvement in a major corruption case involving nearly 350 million RMB, about $50 million. She denied the charges, and prosecutors recommended the death penalty. In July 2016, Zhang's trial began at the Harbin Intermediate People's Court. However, a verdict was postponed until November 2021, 5 years later. The case dates back to 2009, when Zhang was deputy district mayor of Daoli District, overseeing the restructuring of state-owned enterprises and real estate projects. An old state-owned farm in Daoli, despite its poor performance, sat on 1.54 million square meters of valuable land, worth about 2.3 billion RMB, about $330 million. Zhang's district government labeled the farm a negative asset and auctioned it off without transparency, favoring a small, recently established company, Company A, whose registered capital was only 500,000 RMB, or about $70,000. The company was owned by a man named Wei Qi, but the vice president is Zhang Mingjie, who is Zhang's big brother. In 2009, Company A bought the farm for 61.6 million RMB, about $9 million. 2 years later, they transferred 32% of the land, about 500,000 square meters, to Company B, a real estate company set up a month earlier and also controlled by Wei Qi, the same person behind Company A. Zhang's live-in boyfriend, Wang Xiaoyu, a professor at Harbin Institute of Technology, was listed as the owner of Company B. Company B started a housing project without proper government approval, resulting in unfinished buildings that caused significant losses to many buyers. In China, many people buy pre-sale properties, which are homes that have not yet been built or are still under construction. They obtain mortgage loans from banks and begin making payments before the building is completed. If the construction project is abandoned, the buyers must continue to pay their mortgages, or their credit scores will be affected. Many victims of these abandoned projects have been unable to move into the homes they paid for, sometimes for over a decade, yet they are still obligated to repay their loans. In January 2013, Zhang, who headed the Daoli district government, encouraged various real estate companies to acquire other land in the district. As a result of this scheme, nearly 350 million RMB, about $50 million, in requisition funds were swindled. Simply put, Zhang sold state-owned assets at extremely low prices and then reaped enormous profits from the companies that benefited. This included demanding that Wei Qi, the owner of companies A and B, transfer 5 million RMB, about $800,000, and 50% of the company's shares for herself and her boyfriend Wang, valued at about $15 million. The most outrageous aspect of their corruption was their embezzlement of the severance pay intended for the farm's laid-off workers. Company A's $9 million bid, which included the cost of factories, office buildings, equipment, land, and severance pay, was supposed to be paid to the farm and then distributed to the 566 laid-off workers. However, Zhang directed the funds to a company nominally, in the name of the farm, but actually controlled by Company A. This sum included 11.46 million RMB, about $1.7 million, intended as severance pay for the 566 laid-off workers. On average, each worker was to receive only 20,000 RMB, less than $3,000. In 2010, this was a small amount for people who were already struggling with low incomes and now had to feed their families without jobs. They had no choice but to accept it, each desperately waiting for the payout to give them some breathing space until they could find another job. However, some never received it. According to the farm acquisition notice, Company A was supposed to sign at least 3-year employment contracts with all workers who wanted to stay and ensure that the land remained in agricultural use. However, they pursued real estate development instead. After the acquisition was completed, they refused to hire the 566 workers and gave them only a meager severance package. One worker who had worked on the farm for over 20 years received only about $300, just 10% of what he was owed. Worst of all, the farm had its boiler room that provided central heating for the workers' homes. After the farm was sold, the heat was turned off. In Harbin, where the average winter temperature is minus 24 degrees Celsius, about minus 11 degrees Fahrenheit, the workers' water pipes froze and burst. They couldn't afford coal and lacked even the most basic necessities. Without health insurance, money for medical treatment, or the means to buy the cheapest food, their lives descended into desperation, leading to many family tragedies. Under these circumstances, the former farm workers repeatedly reported Zhang's actions. Years passed, but Zhang remained unaffected and even received promotions. Meanwhile, in 2012, Wanting released her song, You Exist in My Song, but it didn't receive much attention at first. A few months later, a male contestant on the popular Chinese singing competition show, The Voice of China, performed the song. The show's high ratings catapulted the song to fame, and soon people discovered that Wanting Q was the original singer. As a result, Wanting Q became an overnight sensation, and even performed at the 2013 Spring Festival Gala. In 2014, she held a solo concert in her hometown of Harbin. However, ticket sales were poor. At the time, her mother, Zhang, was the deputy director of the Harbin Development and Reform Commission. Zhang instructed several real estate companies under her jurisdiction to buy most of the tickets and keep them from Wanting. When the concert began, there wasn't a single empty seat. By then, the Central Inspection Team had arrived in Harbin. The workers seized the opportunity to report Zhang to the disciplinary inspectors and finally received a response. In September 2014, just 2 months after her daughter's concert, Zhang was placed under investigation. Upon hearing this, Wei Qi, the owner of companies A and B, immediately fled to Canada. In 2016, Zhang's trial began. She was charged with embezzlement, bribery, and abuse of power, charges she vehemently denied. She claimed that the land transfer was merely a procedural issue and that the definition of state-owned land use was ambiguous. Regarding the dismissed workers, she argued that the farm was near bankruptcy and unable to pay medical insurance, and that the workers' deaths were not her fault. Zhang admitted soliciting 5 million RMB, about $800,000, from Wei Qi, but denied any other illegal dealings. After the start of the trial, a verdict was never reached because a key figure in the case, Wei Qi, had fled to Canada. After Zhang's detention, Wanting returned to Harbin for a week before leaving and never returning. She began defending her mother online, posting on Weibo, the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, proclaiming her mother's innocence and suggesting that Zhang was a scapegoat in political struggles, but faced widespread ridicule and scorn from Chinese netizens. She was accused of living lavishly in Canada, on her mother's ill-gotten gains from the victim's blood money. Wanting tried to clear the air, saying that while studying in Canada, she cleaned houses for wealthy families on weekends, earning $100 Canadian a week. Despite the hard work, she used the money to pay her tuition and buy CDs. She also said that after her song, You Exist in My Song, became famous, she earned more than 10 million RMB, about $1.6 million, in 1 year, so she didn't need her mother's support. She wanted to change her image from a corrupt official's daughter to a self-made musical talent. However, people who claimed to be her classmates revealed that after arriving in Canada, she indulged in partying, drove luxury cars, lived in a mansion, and spent her free time playing video games instead of attending classes. While Wanting had talent and a passion for music, her musical dreams, forming a band, purchasing equipment, and funding activities required substantial amounts of money. No one believed that she was innocent or unaware of her mother Zhang's embezzlement. In 2015, during an interview with a magazine at UBC, Wanting was asked who her childhood hero was. Wanting replied, "My mother. She is a hardworking person who gave me the best life possible, no matter how she got it." This statement infuriated Chinese netizens and became the top trending topic on Weibo. People saw it as an endorsement of her mother's crimes and an insult to the workers her mother had hurt. Shortly after her mother's arrest, it was revealed that Wanting had a close relationship with Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson, who is 18 years her senior and married with 4 children. Netizens accused Wanting of being a mistress and breaking up someone else's family. In January 2015, their relationship was exposed by the media. Gregor Robertson clarified that he was separated from his wife and in the process of divorce. Afterward, Wanting and Robertson publicly displayed their affection by frequently posting intimate photos and travel photos. Netizens mocked Wanting for returning to Canada just days after her mother's arrest and living a blissful life with her boyfriend, accusing her of neglecting her mother. After that, Wanting posted regularly on China's Weibo, saying she cried every day because her mother's case hadn't gone to trial. When it did go to trial, she posted about the lack of a conclusion, but expressed her faith in China's legal system. Meanwhile, she continued to share her exciting life on Instagram. 2 weeks after her mother's arrest, Wanting attended the opening of a fashion brand in California. 3 months later, she attended a hockey game in Vancouver. 6 months after that, she went scuba diving in Hawaii. A year later, she traveled. 2 years later, she went sailing. 3 years later, she went jet skiing. 4 years later, she went surfing in Miami. Zhang's case went on for 6 years without a verdict, seemingly fading from public memory. However, Wanting's regular posts on Weibo calling for justice for her mother kept Zhang's crimes in the public eye and drew more criticism. Wanting thought she could pressure the court through public opinion, but it had the opposite effect, highlighting her mother's misdeeds and making more people aware of the tragic lives of the 566 fired workers. Wanting's luxurious lifestyle was built on the poverty and suffering of these families. Chinese netizens were deeply upset by her constant pleas for her mother on Weibo. Apart from her complaints about not being able to see her mother, she flaunted her romance with the mayor of Vancouver on Instagram and did nothing tangible to help her mother. Since 2015, she hasn't returned to China to visit her mother or attend her court hearings. Netizens pointed out that, according to precedent, if Zhang had returned the embezzled funds, it would have been seen as a sign of remorse, potentially leading to a lighter sentence. But Wanting hadn't returned any money or compensated the 566 workers. She never responded to the criticism. Her relationship with Gregor Robertson ended after 2 years. In 2016, Wanting wrote a song for her mother, titled The Best Arrangement, with lyrics expressing her hope that her mother would not suffer and that justice would be served. This sparked another wave of outrage, as it portrayed her mother as a victim of political unrest. In September 2016, Wanting gave her first public interview about her mother's case. When asked if she believed her mother could have embezzled such a large sum, she said she was waiting for the best outcome and believed good people would be rewarded and bad people punished. Her answers were seen as evasive. In October 2021, 5 years after Zhang's first trial, progress was made. Wei Qi, the head of companies A and B, who had fled to Canada, returned to China and surrendered. He had left most of his assets behind when he fled, and they were quickly frozen. After 7 years in Vancouver, he ran out of money and decided to return. On November 17, 2021, the Harbin Intermediate People's Court finally handed down its verdict. Zhang Mingjie was sentenced to life imprisonment for bribery and 10 years for abuse of power, with a total sentence of life imprisonment and confiscation of all personal property. Her boyfriend, Wang Xiaoyu, was sentenced to 14 years for bribery. Zhang immediately appealed. On March 24, 2022, the Heilongjiang Provincial High People's Court rejected the appeal and upheld the original sentence. Zhang's $50 million embezzlement didn't all go into her pocket. Wei Qi received a substantial portion, which he used for real estate development. Prosecutors said Zhang's abuse of power caused national property losses of about $30 million. She also illegally instructed Company A to make severance payments to the 566 workers. with most of the money unaccounted for. Before the first trial verdict, Wanting's last Weibo post was mute, accompanied by her own poster. She hasn't posted on Weibo since. In 2017, a popular anti-corruption television series aired in China, featuring a character based on Zhang. On April 15, 2023, news broke that Wanting's 2 properties in Harbin would be auctioned off, with a total estimated value of nearly $1 million. On January 28, 2024, Wanting posted on Instagram about her vegan lifestyle, stating that she hadn't eaten animal products for 4 years. She cited animal rights, environmentalism, and health as reasons for her decision, believing that everyone can make a positive impact on the world through their choices. Because of the backlash, the post restricted people from leaving comments. Critics accused her of hypocrisy, saying she was living off money tainted by the suffering of others while preaching veganism. After her mother's conviction, Wanting stopped publicly advocating for her. She continued her vibrant life, traveling, sometimes with her father, attending events, and promoting veganism. Wanting is just one of many children of corrupt Chinese officials living overseas. She had retained her Chinese citizenship while living in Canada for over a decade and only recently became a Canadian citizen, fearing for her safety and the safety of her money under her Chinese identity. While Wanting has musical talent, how much of her success is due to her mother's illicit funds? Perhaps Wanting genuinely believes that her mother's punishment is unfair, seeing her as a scapegoat while her superiors go unpunished. Zhang's extensive embezzlement and the long period of protection she received, despite multiple reports, suggest systemic problems. However, Zhang was a significant offender, and her crimes weren't lessened by the greater misdeeds of others. Zhang admitted to taking $800,000 in bribes, but what about the previous 2 decades? Some joke that in China, an official who embezzles only a few $100,000 is considered clean. Zhang's case attracted public attention because her daughter, Wanting, is a famous singer. Zhang probably never imagined that her beloved daughter would be publicly condemned. She has harmed herself, her daughter, and 566 workers and their families. Zhang is a typical example of corrupt officials sending their children to the US or Canada. An online post once claimed that 74% of the children of Chinese officials above the ministerial level have US green cards or citizenship, and 91% of their grandchildren are US citizens. The preference for the US is likely due to the ease of transferring illicit funds. These children are usually well protected and unknown to the public, but Wanting's celebrity status makes her a target of public outrage. The criticism she faces is not only because of her own actions, but also because of the anger directed at the group she represents. Some may wonder why these laid-off workers are living in such miserable conditions, and why they can't find new jobs quickly. The 3 northeastern provinces of China, including Harbin, are heavy industrial regions. After massive layoffs due to state-owned enterprise reforms, the region's economy stagnated. Apart from a few relatively open port cities, there are few private enterprises and limited employment opportunities. Over the past 20 years, there has been a significant outmigration of the population. Corruption is worse here than in the southern regions, with ordinary people having to pay bribes and use connections for even small matter. Opinions are divided over Wanting's situation. Some believe that everyone has the right to love their parents unconditionally. They argue that Wanting did nothing wrong by defending her mother and living her life. However, she failed to show empathy and understanding for the victims after the case broke, leading to strong public disapproval. Her continued display of a luxurious lifestyle during her mother's unsolved case contrasted sharply with the public's anger over her mother's actions, further intensifying the criticism against her. Morally and ethically, Wanting doesn't have to bear legal responsibility for her mother's crimes, but she has enjoyed the privileges and superior lifestyle of corruption. The public outrage stems in part from this perceived injustice. She could choose to face the public with more humility and responsibility, and even take concrete actions to help the families of the workers involved. Public reaction to them has, in some cases, crossed the line into personal attacks. Meanwhile, the workers' compensation issues remain unresolved, and the government seems unwilling to address the crimes of its officials. Do you think Wan Ting deserves the criticism she has received from many Chinese people? What do you think about this case? Please share your thoughts and opinions in the comments section. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more crime stories, please like and subscribe to my channel.